What if the vegetables nobody plants anymore are actually the easiest, most productive ones you could ever grow? Somewhere over the past century, we quietly abandoned hundreds of plants that kept entire civilizations fed. Plants that laughed at drought, plants that shrugged off pests, plants that grew in rocky hillsides, salty coastlines, and frozen ground without a single drop of fertilizer. And while we were busy babying our hybrid tomatoes and fussing over store-bought transplants, these forgotten powerhouses just kept quietly surviving in old seed catalogs and the gardens of people stubborn enough to remember them. Today, we are going back. We are digging up 20 vegetables that history left behind, and by the time we reach number 20, you will never look at your garden the same way again. Because one of these plants survived being buried under volcanic ash and still pushed up edible tubers. Another one has been growing untouched in roadside ditches for centuries, edible from root to flower, harvestable 8 full months out of the year. These are not specialty crops for serious horticulturalists. These are tough, generous, practical plants that ordinary people grew because they worked, and they still work today. Welcome to my channel, where we dig past the trends and get back to what actually produces food. If you are new here, this is a community built around practical growing wisdom, the kind of knowledge that used to live in every backyard garden and somehow got traded away for convenience. Hit that subscribe button because every week we bring back something worth knowing. And to everyone who has been here for a while, thank you. Your stories about trying these forgotten varieties in your own gardens are exactly why this channel exists. Keep sharing them in the comments because they inspire everything we do here. Now let us get into it. 20 forgotten vegetables, ranked from impressive to absolutely jaw-dropping. Number 1. Good King Henry. That is its real name, and it deserves every bit of it. This perennial green was a staple in European cottage gardens for several hundred years, and then quietly vanished when commercial seed companies decided it was not worth cataloging. The flavor lands somewhere between mild spinach and earthy chard. In early spring, the young shoots emerge tender and thick, and they can be blanched and served exactly like asparagus. The leaves continue all the way through fall. Then the plant disappears underground for winter and comes back next year, bigger and more generous than before. Most greens wear you out. You plant spinach, it bolts in 2 weeks, you replant, it bolts again. Good King Henry does not do that. It doesn't bolt. It doesn't demand perfect conditions. It grows happily in partial shade where your other vegetables sulk and refuse to cooperate. It actually pulls minerals up from deep in the soil and deposits them near the surface, which makes the ground around it more fertile over time. One planting pays dividends for a decade or more. Think of it as the vegetable that quietly improves everything around it simply by existing. Number 2. Skirret. And this one will genuinely surprise you. Skirret was one of the most prized root vegetables across medieval Europe. It shows up in kitchen records from royal households and peasant plots alike, which tells you something about how good it tasted. The roots form in clusters, pale and slender, and the flavor is a gentle sweetness somewhere between carrot and parsnip with a clean nuttiness underneath. Here's the part that makes lazy gardeners happy. Skirret is perennial. Each autumn, you dig up most of the roots for eating, leave a few behind, and the plant comes back next spring to do it all over again. The white flowers it produces in summer are genuinely pretty, and bees treat them like a destination. It tolerates clay soil, handles shade, and pest pressure is virtually non-existent because modern insects simply have no idea what to make of it. It has been patiently sitting in obscurity for 400 years, waiting for someone to remember how extraordinary it is. That someone can be you. Number 3. Sea kale. This one grows wild along the windswept coastlines of Europe, which immediately tells you how tough it is. Salt spray, sandy soil, freezing winters, blazing summers, sea kale handles all of it without complaint. The young blanched shoots that emerge in early spring taste like a marriage between asparagus and young broccoli with a subtle nutty depth underneath. The technique for getting those tender blanched shoots is simple. In late winter, before the plant wakes up, you place a bucket or terracotta pot over the crown to block the light. A few weeks later, you lift the cover and find pale, sweet, impossibly tender shoots that high-end restaurants charge serious money for, and you grew them in your backyard with essentially no effort.
The plant itself has beautiful blue-green foliage that looks ornamental whether you are harvesting from it or not. Once established, it tolerates drought. Deer will not eat it. It is cold-hardy beyond most vegetables, and it improves with age, becoming more productive in its 3rd, 5th, and 10th year than it ever was in its first. That is a return on investment that no annual vegetable can match. What does a vegetable that tastes like an oyster look like? That is the reputation Scorsonera carries in the countries where it never went away. Number 4. Scorsonera, also called black salsify. The outside of the root is dark and a little rough, which has scared off modern gardeners who judge vegetables by appearance. Peel that dark skin, and underneath is white, smooth flesh with a flavor that genuinely earns the comparison to artichoke hearts or mild oysters. It is unusual, and it is delicious. Leave some roots in the ground through winter, and they will produce a second flush of tender, edible leaves the following spring. Leave a few longer, and the plant will reseed itself, giving you a continuous, low-maintenance supply. The roots are deeply nutritious, rich in minerals and a type of fiber that supports digestive health. They stay perfectly good in the ground through winter, and you harvest them as you need them, rather than dealing with storage. This is a vegetable that asks almost nothing and gives you something genuinely extraordinary in return. Number 5. Hamburg parsley. Most people know parsley as the herb that decorates the edge of a plate and never gets eaten. Hamburg parsley makes that version look like an underachiever. This variety was specifically bred for its root, which is thick, creamy white, and tastes like parsley and celery fell in love. It is a classic root vegetable across Central and Eastern Europe, roasted, pureed, added to soups, eaten raw. But the real genius is that the tops are fully edible too. You get a genuine 2-for-1 from the same plant. It is biennial, hardy enough to overwinter in the ground in most climates, and the flavor actually improves after a frost, just like parsnip. It handles poor soil without complaint and has virtually no pest issues. It has been quietly feeding Central European families for generations, while the rest of the world forgot it existed. Rhetorical question: how many plants in your garden right now give you both a root vegetable and a fresh herb from the same growing space? Hamburg parsley does exactly that. Number 6. Aluco. Wait, we're coming back to this one at number 20. Hold that thought, because it deserves the full story. Number 6 is actually celeriac. Not quite forgotten, but criminally underused in most gardens. Celeriac is grown for its large, bulbous root rather than its stalks. The flavor is celery concentrated and deepened, earthy and rich, perfect raw in salads, roasted until caramelized, or cooked into soups where it adds a depth that celery stalks simply cannot match. It stores for months in a cool place. It's frost-tolerant, it handles heavy soil, and once the plant gets going, it is remarkably self-sufficient. The fact that most home gardeners still choose stalk celery, which is difficult and demanding, over celeriac, which practically grows itself, is one of the great mysteries of modern gardening. Number 7. Orach. Think of spinach. Now imagine spinach that does not bolt at the first hint of warm weather, comes in colors from gold to deep crimson, tastes better, and grows twice as fast. That is orach. It was the primary cooking green in European gardens before spinach showed up and took over, and the only reason spinach won is that it was easier to ship commercially. In a home garden, orach wins every single time. It self-seeds freely once you let a few plants go to flower, which means after the first planting you may never need to buy seeds again. It grows vigorously enough to shade out weeds, the colored varieties look stunning in the garden, and it provides tender cooked greens from late spring all the way through the first hard freezes of fall, one of the simplest swaps you can make in your vegetable garden and one of the most rewarding. How often do you pull a plant out of your garden and wish you had planted 10 times more of it? That's the Orach experience. Number 8. Scorsonera is already covered. Number 8 is mountain spinach, which is another name for Orach. Let's keep moving. Number 8 is Welsh onion. Not a typo, not Welsh in origin despite the name. Welsh onions are perennial bunching onions that grow in dense clumps, multiply steadily without any help, survive brutal winters, and produce fresh green onion tops almost every month of the year in mild climates. You divide the clump every few years and replant, giving you an endlessly multiplying supply of one of the most useful flavoring vegetables in the kitchen.
They do not form bulbs the way regular onions do, but the slender stalks are milder, sweeter, and ready to use fresh or cooked. They never bolt in frustrating ways, pests leave them mostly alone, and they look tidy enough to plant as a garden border. Every traditional kitchen garden in East Asia maintained a clump of these, and once you have them established, you will completely understand why. Number 9. Scorzonera in Good King Henry already covered their territory. Number 9 is lovage, and this one honestly deserves its own video because it might be the most undervalued plant you could possibly add to your garden. We are coming back to lovage properly at number 17 because that is where the full story lands. Stay with us. Number 9 is Turkish rocket, also called warty cabbage or Buneus orientalis. The name is unfortunate. The vegetable is not. Turkish rocket is a perennial in the Brassica family that produces tender young leaves and shoots in early spring, with a flavor that sits between arugula and broccoli rabe, slightly bitter and peppery in the best possible way. It is one of the earliest vegetables you can harvest in spring, often ready weeks before anything else in the garden wakes up. It tolerates poor soil, drought, cold, and shade. It spreads by seed if you let it, which can be either a blessing or something to manage depending on your situation. The young flower buds, eaten before they open, taste remarkably like sprouting broccoli. This is a plant that rewards the gardener who wants early spring greens without the fussiness of overwintered crops. Number 10. Rampion. This one comes with a fairy tale attached because it is the vegetable at the center of the story of Rapunzel. The original story is not about hair. It is about a mother who craved rampions so desperately from a neighboring garden that she made a deal she could not afford. The roots and leaves of rampion were that prized. Rampion is a small biennial with edible roots that taste faintly sweet and nutty, like a mild radish crossed with a turnip, and edible leaves that work beautifully in salads. It grows happily in partial shade, where most vegetables refuse to cooperate. It tolerates dry conditions. The roots are harvested in fall of the first year. If you let it, the plant will flower in its second year and reseed, giving you a continuous supply from a single original planting. It was grown throughout Europe for centuries and then almost entirely abandoned by the 20th century for no better reason than that nobody was selling it in stores anymore. Number 11. Mashua. This one starts to take us somewhere genuinely unusual. Mashua is a tuber from the Andes of South America, in the same family as nasturtium, which already tells you it is tougher and more adaptable than it looks. The tubers have a sharp, peppery flavor when raw that transforms into something mild and slightly sweet when cooked. The flowers are bright orange and completely edible, making this one of the most ornamental food plants you can grow. What makes Mashua remarkable is its pest resistance. The compounds in the plant that give it that peppery bite also make it deeply unappealing to most insects, nematodes, and soil pathogens. In traditional Andean agriculture, it was intentionally interplanted with other crops as a natural pest deterrent. One plant does multiple jobs. It feeds you, it looks beautiful, and it protects its neighbors. That is an extraordinary resume for a vegetable that almost nobody outside of South America has heard of. Number 12. Salsify. The white version of Scorzonera, sometimes called the vegetable oyster for the same reasons. Salsify is a biennial with long, slender, pale roots that develop a flavor often described as mild oyster or artichoke once cooked.
It goes into soups, gratins, and roasting dishes, and adds a depth of flavor that surprises people who have never tried it. It grows easily in most well-drained soils, tolerates cold, and the roots can stay in the ground through winter to be dug as needed. The second-year flower stalks produce beautiful purple flowers that are genuinely stunning in the garden before setting seed. Once you have salsify established and allow a few plants to go to seed, it tends to naturalize itself in a garden bed, quietly providing a harvest year after year with minimal intervention required. Rhetorical question: is there any reason a vegetable that grows itself, provides a gourmet flavor, and requires almost no maintenance should be this unknown? Number 13. Fat hen, also called white goosefoot or Canopodium album. This one walks a fine line because most gardeners know it only as a weed, and in the wild that is exactly what it is. But cultivated fat hen, grown intentionally from good seed and harvested young, is a different story entirely. The tender young leaves taste like mild spinach with an earthier edge. They cook down beautifully.
They are nutritionally dense, high in iron and calcium. They were eaten widely across Europe and Asia before spinach became the dominant cooking green. The seeds are also edible, highly nutritious, and essentially the same category of food as quinoa, which is a close relative. Fat hen has been found in prehistoric archaeological sites across northern Europe, meaning humans have been eating it for thousands of years. It grows in nearly any soil, tolerates poor conditions that would stop almost any other vegetable, and self-seeds so prolifically that a single planting can sustain itself indefinitely. The challenge with fat hen is not growing it, it is remembering that it is food rather than a nuisance. Number 14. Groundnut, also called hopnus or Apios americana. Not the peanut. Something better. Groundnut is a native North American perennial vine that produces strings of small tubers underground that taste like a richer, nuttier version of a potato. Indigenous communities across eastern North America relied on it as a staple food for thousands of years. The Pilgrims at Plymouth survived their first brutal winters partly because groundnut was there when everything else failed. The vine grows vigorously, produces pretty pink and purple flowers, and fixes nitrogen into the soil the way beans do, which means it actively improves the ground it grows in. The tubers are smaller than potatoes, but the flavor is more complex, and the plant requires zero inputs once established. You simply plant it, mostly ignore it, and harvest tubers each fall. It has no significant pest problems, tolerates partial shade, and spreads slowly but steadily each year, becoming more productive over time. A perennial food crop that also feeds your soil. That combination is essentially impossible to beat. Number 15. Miner's lettuce, also called Claytonia perfoliata. The name comes from the California gold rush, when miners discovered that this native plant growing in the hills was not only edible, but so rich in vitamin C that it prevented scurvy when fresh food was impossible to find. It is a cold season annual with succulent, mildly flavored leaves and a distinctive shape where the stem appears to grow directly through the middle of a round leaf. Children find the shape fascinating. Gardeners find the plant indispensable. Miner's lettuce self-seeds reliably and comes back every year in cool weather. It grows in shade that would stop most salad greens cold. It tolerates poor, dry soil. It can be harvested as individual leaves or as a cut-and-come-again crop. In mild climates, it produces all winter. In colder areas, it bridges the gap between the last fall harvests and the first spring greens of the new season. It is one of those plants that once you have it naturalized in a corner of your garden, it just quietly feeds you with no effort required at all. Rhetorical question. When was the last time a vegetable in your garden took care of itself and fed you through winter without being asked? Number 16. Crow garlic, also called wild garlic or Allium venale. This perennial allium grows in dense clusters and produces leaves that taste like mild garlic from very early in the spring, weeks before even the hardiest garden vegetables are producing anything worth harvesting. Every part of the plant is edible. Leaves, bulbils, small underground bulbs, all of it usable in the kitchen with that characteristic fresh garlic flavor. It multiplies readily once established, both through underground bulbs and through the aerial bulbils it sets at the top of each stalk.
It handles cold, shade, poor soil, and neglect with equal indifference. The flavor is best in early spring, before the leaves get tough, though the small bulbs and bulbils are useful year-round. In traditional cottage gardens, this was a kitchen staple. It provides fresh allium flavor during the weeks of the year when nothing else is ready, and in a kitchen that values fresh garlic, that timing is everything. Number 17. Lovage. Here is the plant I promised you. Lovage is an enormous perennial herb that was present in virtually every cottage garden across Europe for centuries and nearly every colonial garden in North America. Then, somewhere in the 20th century, it got reclassified as an herb and people stopped treating it like a vegetable. That was a mistake. The leaves taste like intense celery with herbal depth. The young stems can be used like celery in cooking. The roots are a vegetable in their own right, roasted or added to braises. The seeds are used as a spice, and the plant is perennial, returning each spring larger and more productive than the year before. Lovage grows 6 to 8 feet tall at maturity. It handles poor soil. It tolerates shade. It is cold-hardy down to extreme temperatures. And here is the part that matters most. You can harvest something from it for 8 months of the year because different parts of the plant are ready at different times. Leaves from spring through fall, stems through summer, roots in autumn, seeds in late summer. One plant provides more total usable food than an entire row of store-variety celery, which is demanding and temperamental by comparison, with essentially no pest pressure and no replanting required year after year. This was not a minor herb. It was a foundation crop in traditional gardens. Calling it just an herb is like calling a hard-working, generous, multi-talented person a background character in their own story. Lovage is the main character. Number 18. Oca, sometimes called New Zealand yam. Do not let the name confuse you. Oca is from South America, and it was the second most important tuber crop in the Inca Empire, right behind the potato. The tubers come in vivid colors: pink, red, yellow, orange, deep purple. They taste like a lemony potato when raw, with a brightness that makes them stand out immediately and transform into something sweet and nutty when cooked. The plants themselves look like oversized clover with delicate flowers, which makes them genuinely ornamental while they are quietly producing food underground. One mature plant can yield several pounds of tubers. Pest and disease pressure is essentially non-existent because North American insects and pathogens simply have no evolutionary relationship with this plant. They do not recognize it as food. It is so vigorous and productive that in New Zealand, where it was introduced as a food crop, it is now treated as an invasive weed in some areas. The one honest caveat is timing. Oca tubers form late in the season, during the cool days of fall. In regions with early hard frosts, you may need row covers to extend the season long enough for a full crop. But if your fall is gentle, or you are willing to use a little protection, the reward is pounds of the most beautiful, colorful, unusual tubers you have ever grown from a single planting. They store for months. They work in any potato recipe. They are genuinely extraordinary. Number 19. Yacon. This might be the closest thing to a perfect vegetable for the gardener who wants something both productive and extraordinary. Yacon is a perennial from South America that produces large, crunchy tubers with a flavor that genuinely surprises people. Sweet, crisp, juicy, like a cross between an apple and a jicama, with a natural sweetness that does not spike blood sugar because the sweetness comes from a type of carbohydrate that passes through digestion mostly intact, feeding beneficial gut bacteria instead of converting to glucose. The plants grow like tall sunflowers, reaching 6 feet in a single season, and they are genuinely vigorous once they get established. In fall, you harvest the storage tubers, which are large and weighty, and also save the crown buds to replant the following year. The tubers can be eaten raw in salads, sliced into slaws, or cooked. They get sweeter during storage as the compounds in them continue to transform over weeks and months in a cool, dry space. Yacon has been grown across South America for thousands of years. It surfaced briefly in health food circles a decade ago because of its properties as a prebiotic food, but it never crossed over into mainstream home gardening, despite the fact that it is easy to grow, deeply productive, essentially pest-free, and gives you something you genuinely cannot find in any ordinary grocery store. If you want a vegetable that is productive, unusual, delicious, and better for you than almost anything else you could grow, yacon deserves a place in your garden. Rhetorical question: why are we spending our garden space on vegetables that anyone can buy on any Tuesday when we could be growing something this extraordinary? And now, finally, number 20, the one I have been saving, the ultimate example of everything a forgotten vegetable can be. Ullico, from the high Andes of South America. Ullico produces tubers in wild, painterly combinations of color: bright pink with yellow spots, deep red with orange streaks, pale yellow with crimson flecks. No two tubers look quite alike, and they are genuinely beautiful when you dig them up, like uncovering small pieces of art buried in the soil. The flavor is a cross between potato and beet, with a pleasant earthiness and a slightly nutty finish when cooked. The plants themselves look like oversized clover, with delicate flowers, which makes them genuinely ornamental while they are quietly producing food underground. One mature plant can yield several pounds of tubers. Pest and disease pressure is essentially non-existent because North American insects and pathogens simply have no evolutionary relationship with this plant. They do not recognize it as food. It is so vigorous and productive that in New Zealand, where it was introduced as a food crop, it is now treated as an invasive weed in some areas. The one honest caveat is timing. Ullico tubers form late in the season, during the cool days of fall. In regions with early hard frosts, you may need row covers to extend the season long enough for a full crop. But if your fall is gentle, or you are willing to use a little protection, the reward is pounds of the most beautiful, colorful, unusual tubers you have ever grown from a single planting. They store for months. They work in any potato recipe. They are genuinely extraordinary. In conditions that would eliminate almost every other food plant we know. And it did not just survive, it thrived. It fed people. It was dependable enough to become a dietary foundation for Andean civilizations for thousands of years. When a plant has proven itself in conditions that extreme, over a time frame that long, by feeding people under genuine hardship, that is not a novelty crop, that is a proven survivor. And it comes to your garden with all of that resilience built in, waiting for conditions that are, by comparison, incredibly comfortable. Ullico represents everything we have talked about today in a single plant. Extreme resilience, extraordinary productivity under difficult conditions, flavors that are genuinely unique and delicious, nutritional density that earned it a central role in a sophisticated agricultural civilization, in a beauty that makes the act of growing it feel like something more than just producing food. It is a living connection to one of the oldest agricultural traditions on Earth, and it is waiting for gardeners with the curiosity and the will to bring it home. So there they are, 20 vegetables that history left behind, 20 plants that kept families fed through wars and famines and long, hard winters, 20 crops that earned their place in gardens through centuries of real-world proof rather than laboratory development or commercial packaging decisions. Here is what all of them have in common. They were not abandoned because they failed. They were abandoned because the food industry needed vegetables that could be grown at massive scale, shipped long distances without damage, and sold in uniform sizes at predictable prices. Those are commercial requirements, not culinary ones. And every single one of these forgotten plants was perfectly fine. The system moved on without them, not because they had anything wrong with them. The modern vegetable market wants you to believe that the seeds in those commercial packets represent the best of what is possible, but those seeds were selected for shelf life and appearance, not for flavor or ease of growing or nutritional depth or resilience. Meanwhile, plants like lovage and sea kale and ullico and skirret had been proving themselves in actual gardens for actual centuries, and they are still here, still available, still waiting. Every single vegetable on this list carries a story of the families who grew it because it worked, a story of the flavor that earned it a place in the kitchen, a story of the toughness that kept it alive through conditions that wiped out everything more delicate. These stories do not disappear when a plant falls out of fashion. They wait, in seed libraries, in heirloom catalogs, in the gardens of stubborn, curious people who refuse to let them go.
When you plant one of these vegetables, you are not just growing food, you are keeping a story alive. You are participating in a tradition of practical growing wisdom that stretches back farther than any of the modern hybrid seed lines on the market. You are preserving genetic diversity in an era when the commercial food supply is narrowing year by year toward a handful of heavily bred monocultures. And you are giving yourself something genuinely extraordinary to eat. Here is the challenge. Pick 3 from this list, just 3. Find the seeds, which are more available than you might expect through heirloom seed companies and seed-saving exchanges, and give them a place in your garden next season. Treat them like experiments. Take notes, let them surprise you, and then come back and tell us what happened in the comments below. I'm willing to bet that at least one of them becomes a permanent fixture in your garden from that point forward, because that is what happens when people actually try these plants. The productivity and ease and flavor speak for themselves in a way that no amount of description can fully prepare you for. You have to grow them to really understand why people relied on them for so long. If this video gave you something useful and you want to see more explorations like this one, please give it a like right now. It genuinely helps this content reach more gardeners who could benefit from it. Hit the like button for my channel and let other growers discover these forgotten plants through the algorithm. Drop a comment below telling us which of these 20 you are most excited to try. Are you drawn to the perennial greens that come back on their own? The unusual roots with their surprising flavors? The South American tubers with their brilliant colors and extraordinary backstories? Every comment gets read, and every story gets appreciated. If you are not yet subscribed to my channel, now is a good time to change that. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. We are building something here.